Hello everyone, my name is Katie May and I am a Senior Environmental Health Specialist for the Arkansas Department of Health, and I'm here to talk about some concerns with endocrine disruptors in the Lono County. So what exactly are endocrine disruptors? When we take the phrase apart, endocrine refers to a system in our body. The endocrine system is responsible at maintaining our hormone balance throughout our body. Such hormones that it regulates are ones responsible for our growth. So when an endocrine disruptor it is a chemical that can either be natural or man-made, and it replaces our body's natural hormones. Instead of having our hormones bind to cells, these chemicals will replace our body's hormones and bind to cells in our body, hence the term disruption. This causes a whole host of problems such as developmental, reproductive, and neurological defects. Not only does this affect humans, but it can also harm animals. Let's take a look at the history of endocrine disruptors. Endocrine disruptors is actually a fairly new term, and there's still a lot unknown about them. And most advances made in protecting people and the environment did not happen too long ago, such as DDT in 1947. DDT was a common pesticide used in 1940s, 50s, and 60s for agriculture. The chemical ended up leaking to lakes, streams, and rivers. This led to fish ingesting DDT and eagle ingesting the fish, therefore contaminating the both of them. This caused specific hormone changes in the eagle to be disrupted, such as unformed eggs, as shown on the slide. This was a specific example of DDT disrupting the depleted calcium sources. Eventually, there was a ban placed on DDT in the 1970s. Further in the 1970s, doctors prescribed DES, or diethylstilbestrol, to prevent miscarriages in women. In reality, this did exactly the opposite. The synthetic estrogen acted as an endocrine disruptor by increasing spontaneous abortions and severely harming the fetus's development. Another endocrine disruptor is di-2-ethylhexyl phthalate, or DEHP. This chemical is used in many manufacturers such as food packaging and some children's toys. It wasn't until 2006 that DEHP was recognized as an endocrine disruptor and increased the risk of developmental problems in children, especially male infants. And this was only 11 years ago, which is absolutely mind-boggling. Also, bringing it back to the 1990s, in 1996, the Food Quality and Protection Act was initiated. Congress gave the EPA 2 years to develop a program that specifically screened and tested products to detect endocrine disruptors. With help from another committee, the Endocrine Disruptors Screening and Testing Advisory Committee, 50 different endocrine disruptors were identified and protocols were made to address each one. Now that we've seen the history of endocrine disruptors, how exactly do these chemicals disrupt our body's natural hormones? If you look at the second picture, you'll see a cell surrounded by human hormones. These human hormones are colored blue, and the cell is colored yellow. For right now, ignore the red hormone. So we see in the picture that the outer surface of the cell has receptors, which are indicated by the small little divots outlining the cell. These are places in which hormones can bind to the cell. This interaction regulates cell division and other actions that determine our body's health and development. Now that's straight, let's look at the first picture. Endocrine disruptors come into play once they are digested or they enter our body, which is shown by the red dot in picture 1. Moving on to picture 2, we see that endocrine disruptors is now in our system and is seen as a regular hormone by our body. Moving on to picture 3, the endocrine disruptors are able to bind to cells just like hormones do. This results in endocrine disruptors replacing hormones, which you can see in picture 4. This results in excess hormones in our body, which can cause subsequent health defects. And if these types of reactions occur in a body, say that is developing, such as a child, these effects can be very severe. So where can we find these disruptors? Sadly, there's little research out about endocrine disruptors and much about them is unknown. However, there are a few endocrine disruptors that we know from past exposures and some research. The endocrine disruptors that we are familiar with is DDT, which is used in pesticides. These are sprayed on plants so that insects do not ruin farmers' crops, meaning that people are exposed to these pesticides if they do not properly wash their fruits and vegetables. Also, we have seen in the past, these chemicals are absorbed by the soil and can run off into lakes and rivers, therefore contaminating and harming wildlife. There's also bisphenol A, or known as BPA, which is found in plastics and resins. and it's also found in many food and beverage packages, such as water bottles. We also have phthalates, and these are also used in plastics, but they're used to make plastics more flexible. These endocrine disruptors can be found in household sprays, fragrances, and even deodorant. It's also important to note that these endocrine disruptors can be a natural source, such as phytoestrogens, which are naturally occurring in soy-derived plants. After seeing a few known endocrine disruptors, it is easy to see that exposure can occur in many different ways. This includes ingesting food, dust, and water, inhalation of gases and particles in the air, and even skin contact. While I have the most common ones listed above, there are more endocrine disruptors such as heavy metals, including lead, and flame retardants, and as well as perfluorinated chemicals, which are found in non-stick cookware. Now that we know what endocrine disruptors are, why should you, a resident of Lonoke County, be worried? Well, for starters, it has to do with the geographic location of your county. Lonoke County has around 667 farms as of 2012, where about 84% of them profit off of crop sales. While this is great for the community, it increases the risk of endocrine disruptor exposure. Farms will use pesticides to keep insects from destroying their crop. Many pesticides include DDT and other endocrine disruptors. In Lonoke County alone, there's an incident in pesticide exposure in 51.6 humans per 100,000 people. This is actually higher than national average, which is about 32.7 per 100,000. Not only is there a lot of farming, but there are a lot of rivers and lakes that run through Lonoke County. This increases the risk of exposure since pesticides from farms can contaminate the open water, therefore harming wildlife and humans. This being seen in Boulder County, Colorado, particularly with their fish population. As of 2008, around 18 to 22% of their fish exhibited intersex organs after being exposed to endocrine disruptor waste, which was fed directly into the creek. Another concern is exposure of endocrine disruptors to the special populations of Lonoke County. While animals are a vulnerable population when it comes to endocrine disruptor exposure, so are children. 6.2% of Lonoke's population is children under the age of 5, and around 24% of the population is 18 or younger. This is the main concern because endocrine disruptors can harm a child and an adolescent's development and can even lead to death. So here I am telling you that endocrine disruptors are harmful and that it's a concern. But what exactly is this concern? Health effects associated with endocrine disruptors vary from minor effects to major. At low-level exposure, the harmful side effects of endocrine disruptors are unknown. Little research has been done to determine how exactly these chemicals harm our body at low concentrations. However, knowledge on our body's operations and from previous incidences, we have been able to relate endocrine disruptors with specific adverse health effects. The first relationship we can draw is how endocrine disruptors harm our organs, specifically our endocrine system. Our endocrine system is comprised of organs that produce and regulate hormones. This makes sense since endocrine disruptors harm our produce and are regulated by hormones. We'll backtrack. This makes sense that endocrine disruptors harm our endocrine system since these harmful chemicals act as hormones and replace them. This has been linked to developmental problems since the majority of our hormones play a role in our body's development. Such developmental problems we see are decreased infertility, such as low sperm counts and higher spontaneous abortions, increase in developmental delay throughout our body, including brain, bone, and other vital organs. This has also been linked to increases in cancer, such as breast cancer, testicular, prostate, and thyroid cancer. This is why children and expecting mothers are at high risk for developing adverse health effects. Altering hormones of an individual or fetus that is currently developing can result in cancer, spontaneous abortions of the fetus, impaired neurological and reproductive development, and overall a whole host of problems that results in the child's inability to properly grow. On the last slide, I talked about how there are these so-called relationships between endocrine disruptors and human health effects. However, there is evidence that these chemicals do in fact harm the health of animals. As an environmentalist, it would be against my duty not to discuss how these chemicals are harming our environment. Research shows that when animals come into contact with endocrine disruptors for short periods of time, that there are mild liver damages and sometimes even death. In laboratories using rats as their models, research shows that low doses of endocrine disruptors induce skin conditions, such as acne, and observable damages to the liver, stomach, and thyroid gland. Yet this is just low doses. In high doses, we see cancer develop in rats, neural damage that causes changes in their behavior, lowered immune systems, and reduction in reproduction. Animals within the environment that are at risk for developing disorders are fish, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and invertebrates. And if endocrine disruptors can harm these species, then it can also make an impact on ecosystems. Much like the story about how the eagle eggs were affected due to contaminated fish, endocrine disruptors contamination can affect the health of many animals and humans due to the multiple ways people can become exposed to endocrine disruptors. With all this being said, I want to make a connection between the data we are seeing in animal laboratory studies and the health effects on humans. Since these animals are a type of model that we can draw somewhat accurate conclusions from, the data gathered from these studies is why we are able to say there's a possible link in endocrine disruptors and diseases observed in humans. Now that we know the dangers of endocrine disruptors, let's take a look at how they're regulated. Due to the lack of research, setting regulations and standards can be kind of tricky. So the first regulatory agency involved is the EPA. The EPA recently implemented a program called the Endocrine Disruptor Screening Program, or EDSP for short. The program focuses on screening and identifying harming pesticides, chemicals, and other endocrine disruptors. The EDSP uses what is known as a two-tiered approach for screening. The first tier focuses on screening that identifies chemicals that can potentially interact with the endocrine system. If these chemicals have the potential to interact with thyroid hormones or other endocrine systems, including estrogen and androgen, then they move on to Tier 2. Tier 2 is where researchers identify any adverse health effects of the chemicals. This tier focuses on risk assessment, or where dose relationships are found and mitigation techniques are created for both environmental and human health. Other ways in which endocrine disruptors are regulated is by the Safe Drinking Water Act. The goal of this act is to keep contamination at 0 parts per billion. However, since this is highly unlikely, the act has set a maximum contamination level at 10 parts per billion. Once again, different levels are set for different contaminants, with all of them adding up to 10 parts per billion. For BPA specifically, the Safe Drinking Water Act allows a maximum of 9 nanograms per liter. The FDA also plays a role in regulation, specifically in plastics. While the EPA regulates the BPA level in water, FDA focuses on the BPA levels in food packages and plastic containers. As mentioned before, BPA is found in almost every plastic and metal tin used in food packaging. Through risk assessment, toxicology reports show that a safe dose level for oral exposure is 11 micrograms per person per day. These are levels of BPA that were transferred from containers into food and ingested by humans that cause no harmful side effects. However, in order to stay on the safe side, the FDA has determined a low dose for BPA. While there is little research on low-dose exposures in humans, the FDA has found that there is no observed effects of BPA exposure at 5 milligrams per kilogram of body weight per day. The FDA has stated that when these levels are maintained, then food has contacted BPA-containing materials are safe. While this is the case for adults, the FDA has amended regulations that remove BPA completely from baby bottles and packaging containing infant formula. After seeing how these chemicals are regulated, let's look at how we can prevent exposure. While the effects of long-term exposure on endocrine disruptors are unknown, most professionals encourage practicing a more safer approach when it comes to endocrine disruptor mitigation. Yet, most mitigation techniques are simple. This includes washing your fruits and vegetables to rid any lingering pesticides residue. It also is important to wash your hands before eating to rid any harmful chemicals. Other mitigation techniques involve using a water purifier at your home to reduce the amount of toxins in your drinking water. Other simple ways to limit exposure is to limit the amount of packaged food purchases, particularly any metal cans which may contain BPA and other chemical resins. Instead, purchase local foods which are fresh and wash those as well, make sure to do that, or buy cans that are labeled with BPA free, which is on the label. It is also suggested to limit the use of plastic, such as plastic water bottles and plastic wrap. Using alternatives such as reusable water bottles and glass containers limit BPA exposure. While there is a limited research out on the dangers of phthalates, buying alternative personal products that do not contain phthalates, such as perfumes and deodorant and makeup, would be wise as well. Also, limit the intake of food containing high amounts of hormones, such as soy. Should be considered, especially if you have a genetic predisposition to cancer. With all this being said, an important mitigation technique needs to be kept in mind when we are thinking about the environment. In a sense, this can be done through recycling responsibly and handling our trash so that this does not end up in lakes, rivers, or in the hands of the wildlife. In summary, there is a lot known about endocrine disruptors. We know that endocrine disruptors target the endocrine system and alter development in humans and in animals. While more is known about the harmful effects in animals, connections are drawn from laboratory studies in order to develop policies and regulations while research continues. We also see that endocrine disruptors are a wide variety of chemicals that are found in the majority of household products, such as Tupperware and food containers. Overall, limiting items containing endocrine disruptors is a key to maintaining the health of our wildlife and the citizens of Lonoke County. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope this sheds light on the potential harms that may come with endocrine disruptors.